Hello everybody, this is Andrew again. In this screencast, I'm going to take a little bit of time to show you all of the templates that you'll find that have been added to the productivity enhancements for SharePoint developers that I've created for developers using CodeRush and Refactor within Visual Studio. Now first, I want to show you that I've gone through and I have a test project here which has a couple things that you can download from the article on my site, but you'll find a few things in here that will make your life a little bit easier in testing and kind of kicking the tires here, so you don't have to muck up one of your existing projects. I've got a test event receiver, nothing special about him, he just inherits from a specific receiver class. Same thing with a feature receiver. I've got a custom field type, also a web part class, a workflow class as well, and then everything has also been signed so that I'm generating strong names. Okay. So let's go in and let's first take a look at some of the different templates. Now, one thing you can note here is that this keys window at the bottom here is going to show you the keys I'm typing on the keyboard. Occasionally I'll clear it out so gives you a better idea of exactly what's going on, what I'm typing is to get this stuff to work. So if you open up the DevExpress menu and go Options, select Editor and then Templates, and then change your language to XML, assuming your install went okay. What you'll find is a list of a ton of templates here. Now, we're just going to be interested in this screencast on this node, the Features node. Now, you'll see in the Features node, we have a bunch of different things here. So I want to first start out with these different fXML templates. All right, we'll come back to this list a few times. So we want to create a new feature. Whenever we want to create a new feature today, we have to type out the entire, feature, XML namespace, pick from the SharePoint, and then we go through and we would enter in all these different properties here, or attributes, one by one. We already saw that we've got one template that we can use here, say new GUID, make our lives a little bit easier. We'll close off the feature. We have to do an element manifest, and then add a new element manifest file here. Location equals elements.xml. Okay, that's how we do it today, or I guess without the new GUID. That's a tool that we gave you. Instead, life would be so much easier if we could just stub a feature out. Now you can use snippets in Visual Studio. I prefer this option because it's going to give me a lot more power. So to create a new feature definition file, you're creating a new feature XML file. One of the things to note here is the templates, all the template names are basically mnemonics. So when you're trying to do something, think about what you're trying to do and think of it as like almost an abbreviation or an acronym for to help you remember what the different mnemonics are. Okay? So in this case, and I fully expect it's going to take some time to get used to it. It took me some time to get used to these as well. But once you get the hang of it, you definitely save some time. So let's say I want to create a new feature definition file. To do that, I'm going to say fxml and then hit space. It's going to stub out a brand new feature for me. Let's shrink this keys window down just a bit. Okay. What do I get? Automatically, I'm going to get a new GUID that's generated for me using our new GUID template. It's giving me a title, description, scope, and hidden. But the neat thing here is that I can go in, and as I come into one of these different items here, so let's just say this is some feature title. I hit enter. It's going to take me to the next area here. I hit enter again, and notice that there's even a little tool help window here that's telling me what my different options are. So I'll delete that and then pick from one of the options. There you go. What if my feature had a feature receiver in it? Well, I would go in and I would say receiver assembly and receiver class. I would then have to go to my project, go to my feature receiver. Okay, my name is this, that's my type. So if I grab this guy, I can put him in here, or my namespace, and then grab the type, put the type here, and then I got to go through and get the 4-part name for this guy. It's tedious. If a machine can do it, wouldn't you rather have it do it? Well, we saw earlier in an earlier screencast that there is a template called assembly full name that'll go through and stub out the entire 4-part name. And what this guy does is that if the project's been built, he'll be able to get all 4 pieces: the file, the assembly file name, the version, the culture, and the public key token. If the file has not been built, then it can build the 4-part name itself using some of the defaults, but for the public key token it can't grab that because the project hasn't been built and signed. So instead it'll have like a little token here saying replace this. Well, instead of doing that, we still have to go through and do the receiver manually. There's a template called feature receiver XML that when I hit space, it'll stub it out. It gets the exact same thing we saw just a second ago, except the receiver assembly and receiver class are automatically filled out. What it did here is it did the same receiver assembly template that we showed just a second ago. And then the receiver class, what it did is it walked through the entire project, through all the types inside the project, and it found the first type that implements Microsoft.SharePoint.sp feature receiver. When it found that type, it grabbed the full name of that type and stuck it in right here. Okay? Making life a lot easier. We got one as well for workflows. So feature workflow XML, and this has been designed to work with InfoPath forms. Okay? The reason it's been designed to work with InfoPath forms, you can see here that receiver class and assembly. These are the two stock attributes that you want to use, and their values here when you developed a workflow with Visual Studio that uses InfoPath forms as the different forms. It's going to suck these two things down. Same thing here. You've then got your properties here that you've got already listed, and I like to stick all my forms inside of a forms subdirectory in my feature. If you don't like that, you can go in and edit the template yourself and just pull that out. All right. So those are the different feature templates. Let's now take a look at a lot of the element ones, and this is where we're going to see there's a ton of stuff for these guys. So we had our feature, which is a just say a feature XML that we created that was just something very simple. Now we need an elements file. So I'm going to jump over here and pick elements.xml, and from in here we need to start with a new Elements XML file. So to do that, we're going to have an Elements XML, which is going to give us the node, and now we get to see all the different options that we have here. Now all of these guys, you'll see if you go to the options, you'll find all of these inside of this element manifest list here. So I'm going to start. I'm not going to walk through all these in order. I'm just going to kind of run through them in like an alphabetical order of how we're going to find them. But you can find these guys. You see they're listed all by their templates, and they have these little explanations of what they are. All right. So let's come in and let's say we want to create a new custom action. Well, now the way the mnemonics work here is you're within an elements file. So the first thing you're going to want to type is E for elements. Once you've done an element, then it's what kind of a site element do you want to create? Well, I want to create a custom action. So element custom action ECA is going to give us stub out a new element custom action here. All right. Finishes off with a marker at the very end. If you didn't see that, there's usually a little blue arrow that sits there underneath the custom action, and no matter where I am on the page, I just hit escape and it'll jump down to where that guy is. All right. So that's how we can create a new custom action. We have one for custom action groups. So element custom action group. The nice thing too here is that the entire item that's been pasted to the screen, or this custom action group node, it's one item on the undo stack. So I can just go through and hit a Control Z, and it would undo the entire thing. All right. The next one we want to have is say like maybe a content type binding. So for new content, or sorry, let's do new content type first. So let's say I want to create a new content type. So element content type. Here's a content type. We can create a new content type ID. I don't have my new GUID on there. Let's go through and let's create a new GUID. You know what? Let's just create a new GUID this way. Stick it in up here. Remove the dashes. And there we go. Now we got a new content type. A new content type. Description is description. Group is group. That's fine for now. Well, now one of the things that's kind of cool here is that if I take this content type, I put it on the clipboard. If I want to go through and create a content type that inherited from this guy, now note I've got this guy on the clipboard here. Okay, so Control C. You can see that I've got this guy on the clipboard. If I go to create a new content type, it'll automatically add in the ID, the content type ID that is sitting on the clipboard. All right, and then from there I could take this and then go to the very end of it and add on my own stuff to it. That makes life a little bit easier. All right. Now before we go on, I guess we've got these field refs here. Let's go ahead and do that first. So we have, for field refs, I could go in and say element content type field reference, and it's going to stub out a new content type field reference. Now it's got that, you saw this is kind of a little something you just got to deal with. What it's doing here is, it's better if I show the template itself. What it's doing here is that it's creating a new element content type. Okay. What the element content type is doing is it's got two different options here. The first one is it's just going to put in something called content type ID if there's nothing on the clipboard. However, if the context here, you can see down here in the usage of the context, if I look at the clipboard, you have this new thing called has SharePoint ID on it. So if I look at what that context is when has SharePoint ID has been selected, it's going to go in and it's going to put whatever's on the clipboard. Well, has SharePoint ID is looking for one of two things: either a GUID on the clipboard with or without the curly brackets on the ends, or a content type ID. So in this case, I had a content type ID already on the clipboard, and so it actually saw that and it pasted it in for the field ref on the ID here. But if I didn't have a content type in there, it would have just put in a unique ID of the site column. So in this case, let's put something else on the clipboard, say field refs, come down here, remove this field reference, and now if I add a new field ref, element content type field ref, you can see here there was no content type ID or GUID on the clipboard to show this guy to automatically paste him in. All right, and then we can just go in and add in all the different stuff here for a field ref. All right, if I want to add another field ref, element content type field ref, I hit escape to jump down to the marker for after the field ref and add in element content type field ref. Okay, makes your life a little bit easier here, as you can see. All right, so let's get rid of all these guys. The next thing I want to show is a content type binding. So if I grab this, if I select this content type ID here, and I put him, let's put something else on the clipboard first. So content type here, we're going to get rid of these field refs just to make some room here. Let's see, I'll go in and say like this. Let's go ahead and say a new element content type binding, and it will go through and say, here's the content type ID, and then here's the list URL of what I want to go ahead and bind this guy to. All right, and it just picks the master page gallery by default. You don't have to use master page gallery. You can make it be anything you want. But like I said, if he's got a GUID on it, if he's got a content type ID on the clipboard, when I say element content type binding, it'll go ahead and paste that in there for us, making life easier. All right. So that's element content types. We looked at custom actions, custom action groups, content types, content type bindings, and then also the field references within content types. Let's look at delegate controls. So when I want to create a new delegate control, there's really two different options. I can create a delegate control that registers a user control or an ASCX file as the delegate control, or a server control. So the two different options here, there's actually three templates for these guys. Just show you how this stuff works really quick, and then we'll actually see it in action. So if you look at the delegate controls, you see three of them listed. Well, if I pick site column here, there's there's a server control and there's a user control. So if I look at the element delegate control, he's going to stub out assuming that I'm going to use just a standard ASCX file. However, if there's another option here for element delegate user control, because I have one for element delegate server control. The element delegate user control, because the delegate control one is already assuming that I'm using an ASCX file. If I choose element delegate user control, EDUC, he's just calling the template EDC. All right. And then I have one for server control. So enough talking, let's see this in action. If I go in and say element delegate control, it stubs out everything I need here to go ahead and start creating a new element delegate control. And like I said, we have one for element delegate user control that stubs out the exact same thing. So EDUC and EDC are the same thing, essentially. Now the cool one is the element delegate server control. What he's going to do, he is automatically going to list out the name for our entire site here. Okay? And in addition, we also have this control class here that's gone through, and he's automatically added in the project namespace, but then you have to go through and you have to put the type name in. So you would just assume that, yeah, it looks good, and type name would be some type that I've created that's got the server control in it. All right. So with delegate controls created, let's take a look at event receivers. So I'd say like an element event receiver, stub him out, and you'll see here that I've got an option here to put in the list template ID, It's gone through and created a brand new receiver for me. Name attribute, the assembly, class, and sequence. It's already stubbed all this stuff out for me. Now some of the things, name needs some work here. Template or type is going to need some work as well. The assembly, again, got the 4-part name automatically. And it automatically went through, walked through the entire project, and found the first type that implements a event receiver for either a, I think it's a list item event receiver or a list event receiver, one of those two. Okay, it's going to find the first one that matches that. Well, what if I want to go through and create a receiver inside of the receivers collection? That's an element event receiver receiver. There you go. The next one I want to show you is the stapling feature. Okay, so we have these, what are they called? The feature site template associations, and this is where we can staple a feature to an existing site template ID. So what we'll do here is, again, I'm just going to put something generic on the clipboard, so I can say an element feature site template association, stub it out, and I've got all the stuff that I need here. But it's also smart enough that if I have an ID of a feature on the clipboard, it'll automatically add that for me, making life much easier. Okay? I've also got templates for element list template. All right. We've got one for an element list instance. Now let's move on a little bit into the element modules here, where I want to go through and provision files into SharePoint. Now the way this works is that we have an element module node. So I say element module, and it'll go through and automatically create in an element module node here. Okay, so what do we get? We have the element module parent node here. It's going to automatically add one file, okay, and then close out the module. Now one thing you may have noticed is that when I did this, you see we're getting these URL and name and URL and path, all these different things, these different attributes. I've seen many SharePoint developers get confused with which is which. I get confused because the URLs don't mean the same thing between the two, so it's kind of frustrating. So instead, when you do this stuff, when you're working with this template, notice that we have these nice little like tooltips here that are explaining kind of what's going on, what we're looking for at the time. All right. Let's say I want to add in some properties for a file. Okay, well I would just say, well, before we do that, let's say I want to add in a new file here. So it would be an element module file. All right. And if I want to add in some properties for that file to specify certain values of the file that's being provisioned into, if it's being provisioned into a document library, if I want to pass in specific properties to set the values of certain fields in that document library, I can say element module file property. Okay. Element module file property. Oops, not enter, space. Okay. Now, another type of module provisioning is when I want to provision a web part files, web part definitions into the web part gallery. We have a special module provisioning for this because we know a lot of stuff is already pretty specific. So, for example, we have an element module web part that will do a couple things for us automatically. First, he's already been set up to deploy the guy to the web part gallery. Then I have to put a path in here, a relative path to the folder containing the web part files in my feature. So obviously this doesn't even have to be here if you put them in the root of your feature. Automatically adds in a .webpart file for you. Calls it Ghostable and library, and then it also gives you two properties right off the bat here, one for the group and one for the title. Okay. The last two sets I want to do, there's two more we want to do here. One of them is site columns, and the next one will be workflows. So first, let's look at an element site column. So element site column, he'll go through, automatically stub out a bunch of stuff for us. We already get the ID, which is nice. And then you also see this little linked field that you may have seen, that you saw in the templates screencast that show with the field type definitions. That when I type in the name, the static name is going to change along with it. So I could say press release body. Let's just call press release title. Jump down here, press release title. The group would be PR fields. Type is a single line of text required. Sure, all that stuff looks good. Now remember too, I said that if I had an ID on this, on the clipboard, when I go through to create a new content type, and within that content type, I create a new element content type field reference, it would automatically put the GUID on the clipboard for me, alright, which is handy. Again, we want to go through and build. Let's look at some templates we have for workflows. We have an element workflow that will go through and stub out everything we need for a workflow. It went through and not only put in the code side assembly with the 4-part name or the strong name, but it walked through the entire project, finding the first type that implements one of the two workflow classes that we need, or types. For example, one of them would be sequential and one of them would be state machine. So it's looking for the first one that matches that to put in this code beside assembly and class in here. If your workflow is using InfoPath forms, maybe you want it to be a little different here. For an element workflow for InfoPath forms, it'll stub out the same thing, or stub out something very similar. It gives us the code beside assembly and class. All the different URLs are the default URLs that we would normally use. We have the content type ID of the base task list, and then we put in some of the associations, instantiation, and task URNs in here. Not all of them are obviously required, but some of them you do need, so you would find those in there. And then finally, what if I didn't use InfoPath forms? Well, then you've got element workflow pages. So just ASP.NET pages, and then you would specify you would just associate enter them in this way. Okay. So with that, that's a demo of all the different site templates or site elements that you'll find inside the feature manifest, or sorry, the feature schema for the inside of these tools and these templates that I've given you. So in a future screencast, we'll see the solution schema, refactorings, etc.